A shift, ice coming, God ice moving on your behalf. A shift is coming, not with the clatter of thunder you might expect, nor always with the drama our imaginations crave, but often quietly, like dawn creeping into a darkened room while the sleeper still believes it is night. We have been trained to look for God only in the spectacular, as though he were obliged to announce his movements with fireworks and fanfare. Yet history, scripture, and the testimony of countless ordinary lives tell a subtler truth. God most often moves when we think nothing at all is happening, when the soil looks barren and the sky feels silent. And it is precisely there, in that uncomfortable waiting, that the shift begins. You see, we make a serious mistake when we assume that stillness means abandonment. We confuse delay with denial and silence with absence. But the silence of God is not empty, it is heavy with intention. A farmer does not shout at the seed buried underground, nor does he panic because it has disappeared from sight. He understands something the impatient heart forgets, that the most important work happens where the eye cannot see. So it is with you. What you call stagnation, heaven may call preparation. What you call loss, God may call clearing the ground. There are seasons when it feels as though every door has closed at once, as though life itself has conspired to corner you into disappointment. Prayers seem to return unanswered, efforts fall flat, and hope grows thin. But consider this, a door that closes can protect you just as surely as one that opens. We are fond of asking God to take us somewhere new, yet we protest fiercely when he first removes us from where we are. The shift you are praying for cannot arrive while you cling desperately to what has already outlived its purpose. God's movements are rarely random. They are deliberate, layered, and deeply personal. He does not merely change your circumstances, he reshapes the person who must live within them. If he were to move you too quickly, without the necessary inner work, the blessing you long for might crush you rather than carry you. Strength must be grown, not granted. Wisdom must be learned, not downloaded. Faith must be tested, not assumed. And so, what feels like God taking his time is often God taking you seriously. There is a peculiar mercy in being misunderstood during these seasons. People may look at your life and see only delay, while you sense, faintly at first, that something deeper is stirring. They may advise you to settle, to compromise, to lower your expectations in the name of realism. But realism, when stripped of hope, becomes a poor substitute for truth. God has never been confined by the limits others place on your story. He is not intimidated by your weakness, nor surprised by your past. He works not because you are sufficient, but precisely because you are not. The shift that is coming is not merely external. It is not only about what God will do for you, but what he will do in you. There are habits that must be unlearned, fears that must be faced, and false images of God himself that must be gently dismantled. Many of us secretly believe God is generous in theory but cautious in practice, loving in principle but reserved in action. Yet the cross stands as a permanent contradiction to that fear. A God who would give himself so fully has not suddenly grown stingy with his grace. It is often when everything familiar falls apart that we discover what was never meant to hold us together in the first place. Comfort can be a cruel master. It persuades us that safety is the same as goodness, that predictability is the same as faithfulness. But God is less interested in keeping you comfortable than in making you whole. A shift, by definition, unsettles what has grown too fixed. It disrupts patterns that no longer serve his purpose. And yes, it can feel frightening, because surrender always does. Still, there is a quiet assurance available even in the middle of uncertainty. It comes not from knowing exactly what God will do next, but from knowing who he is. Faith, after all, is not confidence in outcomes. It is confidence in character. When you trust God's heart, you can endure not knowing his timeline. You can walk forward without seeing the entire road. You can accept that obedience sometimes feels like stepping into fog, guided only by a voice you have learned, slowly and imperfectly, to recognize. Do not despise the small signs of movement, a renewed desire to pray, a sudden clarity about what must be let go, a peace that arrives without explanation. These are often the early tremors of a greater change. God rarely overturns a life in a single moment. He turns it, degree by degree, like a great ship responding to a steady hand on the wheel. From a distance, it may look as though nothing has changed, but over time, the direction becomes unmistakable. There is also this truth, uncomfortable though it may be: God sometimes answers our prayers by first contradicting our expectations. We ask for strength, and He gives us weakness that teaches dependence. We ask for clarity, and He gives us trust that learns to walk without it. We ask for rescue, and He gives us endurance. But make no mistake, these are not lesser gifts. They are the tools by which lasting change is built. A shift rooted only in circumstance will fade. A shift rooted in character will endure. If you feel tired, take heart. Weariness is not always a sign that you are doing something wrong. Sometimes it is simply the cost of carrying hope through a long night. God is not offended by your exhaustion. He does not demand constant cheerfulness or unbroken confidence. He invites honesty. He meets you not where you pretend to be strong, but where you finally admit you are not. And it is there, in that surrendered honesty, that His strength finds room to move. You may be closer to the turning point than you think. Often, the final moments before a breakthrough feel the heaviest, the most resistant, the most discouraging. This is not cruelty, it is contrast. Light is most noticeable after darkness. Freedom is most precious after confinement. When the shift comes, and it will not erase the memory of the waiting, but it will redeem it. You will see, with a clarity only hindsight provides, that even the delays were shaped by love. God is moving on your behalf even now, not anxiously, not hurriedly, but purposefully. He is aligning circumstances you cannot see, softening hearts you cannot reach, and preparing paths you have not yet imagined. The story is still unfolding, and the author has not lost his place. What feels unfinished is unfinished because it is not yet time to end it. And so you stand, perhaps uncertain, perhaps hopeful, perhaps both at once, on the edge of a change that is already in motion, learning, slowly, bravely, to trust that the hand guiding your life has never let go and will not begin to do so now, even as the ground beneath you begins to move and the familiar outlines of your world start to shift, making room for what is coming next, for what must come next, for what grace has been quietly preparing all along in ways you could not yet see but are beginning, just beginning, to sense as the weight of the old gives way and the promise of the new draws nearer. Nearer still, until even your doubts begin to feel less like enemies and more like signposts pointing toward a deeper reliance. For doubt, when honestly faced, has a curious way of clearing the air. It strips away the illusions we have carefully dressed up as faith and leaves us with something simpler, sturdier, and far more demanding: trust. Not the sort of trust that flourishes only when circumstances are friendly, but the kind that survives unanswered questions and apparent contradictions. This is the trust God cultivates when He is moving on your behalf, because it is the only soil strong enough to support what He intends to grow. There is a temptation, especially in low, NG seasons of waiting, to believe that God's favor must be earned again and again, as though every setback were evidence of His disappointment. But grace, by its very nature, refuses to operate on such terms. If God's love depended on your flawless performance, it would not be love at all, but wages carefully calculated and easily withdrawn. The astonishing claim of the gospel is that God moves toward us not when we have finally sorted ourselves out, but while we are still tangled in confusion. He does not wait for you to become worthy of a shift. He initiates the shift to make you new. When God begins to move, He often unsettles our definitions of success. We have a way of measuring progress by visible markers, numbers, applause, immediate results. God, however, measures by faithfulness, by hidden obedience, by choices made in secret when no one else is watching. A life can look unimpressive on the surface while being profoundly aligned beneath it. And alignment, not appearance, is what determines whether you can bear the weight of what is coming. God is less concerned with how quickly you arrive than with how deeply rooted you are when you do. You may notice in this season a strange narrowing of options. Paths you once assumed would be available suddenly disappear. Opportunities that looked promising dissolve without explanation. At first this feels like loss, and it is natural to grieve it as such. But narrowing is not always punishment. Sometimes it is focus. A river gains strength not by spreading endlessly outward, but by being channeled. God often removes distractions not because they are evil, but because they are merely good, and good things can still keep you from the best. There is also a refining of desire that takes place when God is moving. What once excited you may begin to feel hollow, while things you ignored before now carry unexpected weight. This can be disorienting, even frightening, because desire feels so personal, so tied to identity. Yet God knows that misplaced desire can quietly govern a life, steering it far from its true purpose. He does not strip desire away to leave you empty. He redirects it so that what you long for no conflicts with what you are becoming. In moments of prayer, you may find yourself less interested in demanding answers and more willing to sit in God's presence. Words come more slowly, silence stretches longer, and yet instead of feeling abandoned, you sense a deeper communion forming. This is not regression, it is maturity. A child chatters constantly to be assured of attention. An adult understands that presence does not always require speech. God is not offended by your questions, but He invites you into a relationship that does not collapse when questions remain unresolved. Do not underestimate the courage it takes to remain faithful when results are delayed. Perseverance is often celebrated in hindsight, but in the moment it feels painfully ordinary, even invisible. You wake up, you do what you know is right, you resist the same temptations again, you pray the same prayers again. There is no dramatic breakthrough, no immediate reward. And yet, this quiet consistency shapes you in ways a sudden miracle never could. When the shift finally manifests, it will rest on a foundation laid by countless unseen choices. It is worth remembering that many of the greatest movements of God began in obscurity, a shepherd tending sheep, a young woman carrying a promise no one else could see, a carpenter working with his hands while the world hurried past. God does not disdain small beginnings, He specializes in them. What appears insignificant to others may be the very place where eternity intersects with the ordinary. The shift you await may already be present in seed form, easily overlooked, patiently growing. There will be moments when you are tempted to rush the process, to force a door open rather than wait for God to unlock it. Impatience often disguises itself as initiative and fear as prudence. But a door opened prematurely can lead to rooms you are not ready to inhabit. God's timing is not arbitrary. It is shaped by wisdom that sees the whole story at once, not just the page you are currently reading. Trusting that wisdom requires humility, the willingness to admit that your perspective, however sincere, is incomplete. As God moves on your behalf, He may also expose attachments you did not realize had such a strong hold on you. These are not always sinful things. Often they are sources of security you have quietly elevated to ultimate importance. When God touches these areas, it can feel as though He is taking something away. But what He is actually doing is restoring proper order. Anything that replaces God as your primary source of hope will eventually fail you. The shift He brings is not meant to impoverish you, but to free you from dependencies that cannot sustain you. You may notice that your prayers themselves begin to change. They grow less scripted, less concerned with sounding right, and more honest. You find yourself saying, "I don't understand," or "I'm afraid," without immediately rushing to correct yourself. This honesty is not weakness, it is the doorway to intimacy. God does not require polished language. He desires truthful hearts. When you stop performing in prayer, you begin to encounter God as He truly is, rather than as you fear He might be. There is also a growing sensitivity to the needs of others that often accompanies personal transformation. As God works in you, He draws your attention outward. Compassion deepens. Judgment softens. You begin to recognize your own struggles reflected in the lives around you. This is no accident. God rarely blesses us in isolation. What He is doing in you is meant to flow through you, touching others in ways you may never fully see or understand. At times, the waiting will feel like standing between two worlds, the old no longer fitting, the new not yet revealed. This in-between space can be lonely. Familiar markers are gone and nothing has replaced them. Yet this is often where faith becomes most real. Stripped of certainties, you discover whether you trust God for who He is, not merely for what He provides. The shift is not just about arrival, it is about who you become in the journey. Be patient with yourself in this season. Growth is rarely linear. There will be days of clarity followed by days of confusion, moments of courage followed by moments of fear. This does not mean the process has failed. It means you are human. God's faithfulness does not waver with your emotions. He is not startled by your setbacks nor discouraged by your slowness. He works with the raw material of real lives, not idealized versions of them. You may look back and realize that some of the prayers you once begged God to answer were, in fact, answered by being withheld. Protection often masquerades as disappointment. Paths not taken, relationships that ended, opportunities that slipped away, these may have spared you from burdens you were never meant to carry. With time, you will see that God's no was not a rejection, but a redirection. As the shift draws nearer, there is often an invitation to let go more fully. Control loosens its grip. You begin to recognize the futility of managing every outcome. This surrender is not passive resignation, it is active trust. You still show up, you still act responsibly, but you no longer believe that everything depends on you. There is relief in this realization, a lightness that comes from finally laying down a weight you were never designed to bear. God is not moving you toward a life free of difficulty. He is moving you toward a life anchored in Him. Challenges will still arise, but they will meet a different version of you, one more grounded, more resilient, more aware of where true strength comes from. The shift is not about escaping struggle, it is about being transformed within it. You may not yet see how all the pieces will fit together, and that is all right. Understanding often lags behind obedience. The meaning of this season may only become clear in retrospect, when you can trace the quiet thread of God's guidance through moments that once felt random or painful. For now, it is enough to know that He is present, attentive, and actively at work. Even now, as you read these words, something within you may be stirring, a recognition, a gentle confirmation that this is not coincidence, that stirring is not proof of what will happen tomorrow or next week, but it is evidence that God is near. He is not distant, not indifferent, not delayed by indecision. He is moving with purpose, with patience, with a love that refuses to abandon what it has begun. And so you continue forward, not because every question has been read, but because you trust the one who walks with you through the unanswered ones. You take the next step, however small it feels, believing that obedience today prepares the ground for tomorrow. The shift does not arrive all at once, it unfolds, layer by layer, moment by moment, as you learn to recognize God's movement, not only in dramatic change, but in the quiet, faithful unfolding of a life being shaped by grace, guided by truth, and held steady by a promise that is still working its way toward fulfillment even now, even here, as the story continues to open and the next chapter begins to press gently, insistently into view not as a sudden spectacle but as a gradual unveiling, like a curtain drawn back inch by inch so the eyes can adjust to the light. God in His wisdom knows that revelation delivered too quickly can blind rather than bless, and so He reveals enough for you to keep walking, but not so much that you stop trusting. This is the delicate balance of faith, seeing just enough to move forward, yet not enough to become self-sufficient. There is a quiet courage forming in you now, whether you recognize it or not. It is not the loud, impulsive bravery that rushes headlong into danger, but the steadier kind that rises each morning and chooses faithfulness again. This courage is forged in repetition, in the daily choice to believe that God's promises remain true even when circumstances argue otherwise. Over time, these choices accumulate, shaping a resilience that cannot be easily shaken. You may find yourself reflecting on past seasons, noticing patterns you could not see before. Moments that once felt random now appear connected, threads woven into a larger design. This hindsight is a gift, not to trap you in nostalgia, but to reassure you that God has been faithful before and will be faithful again. Memory, when rightly used, becomes a source of hope rather than regret. It reminds you that the God who carried you then is the same God who carries you now. As God moves, he may also challenge your understanding of what it means to win. Victory in his economy is not always about conquest or acclaim. Sometimes it looks like restraint, like choosing forgiveness when resentment feels justified, like obedience when compromise would be easier. These victories rarely attract applause, but they shape the soul in ways public triumphs never could. They prepare you to handle greater responsibility without losing humility. There is also an invitation to rest that accompanies this shift, though it may seem paradoxical. Rest does not mean inactivity. It means trusting that God is at work even when you are not striving. Many people exhaust themselves trying to force outcomes God has already promised to bring about in his own way. Rest is the quiet rebellion against fear, the refusal to believe that everything depends on constant effort. In rest, you declare that God is sufficient, that his timing is trustworthy. You may notice that certain conversations begin to feel different. Words that once stirred anxiety now lose their power. Opinions that once unsettled you no longer define you. This is not indifference, it is discernment. As your identity becomes more rooted in God's truth, external voices lose their authority. You begin to listen more carefully, weighing counsel without surrendering conviction. This inner steadines. S is another sign of God's movement, subtle but profound. There will still be moments when the old fears resurface. Growth does not erase history overnight. But you will find that fear no longer has the final word. It may knock, but it does not control the house. You acknowledge its presence without obeying its commands. This is not denial, it is maturity. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward in spite of it, trusting that God's presence outweighs every threat. In this season, you may also sense a deepening gratitude for ordinary mercies, a quiet morning, a timely word, a moment of peace. These small gifts begin to feel significant. Gratitude sharpens your awareness of God's nearness. It trains your heart to recognize grace not only in answered prayers, but in daily sustenance. When you learn to see God in the ordinary, you are less likely to miss him in the extraordinary. God's movement often involves a reordering of priorities. Things that once consumed your energy begin to fade in importance, while what truly matters comes into clearer focus. This is not loss, it is clarity. A life cluttered with distractions cannot easily respond to divine direction. As unnecessary weights fall away, you find yourself more available, more attentive, more ready to respond when God calls you to act. You may also find yourself standing at crossroads that require decisive faith. Not every step will be obvious. Some choices will carry risk, demanding trust rather than certainty. In these moments, God does not always provide detailed instructions. Instead, he asks you to apply what you already know, to love, to act justly, to walk humbly. Guidance often comes, not as a map, but as a compass, pointing you toward faithfulness rather than guaranteeing ease. As God moves on your behalf, he may also use unexpected people to encourage or challenge you. Words spoken casually can carry surprising weight. Encounters that seem coincidental may linger in your mind, stirring reflection. God delights in using ordinary interactions to accomplish extraordinary purposes. Remain attentive. Grace often arrives disguised as interruption. There is a growing awareness, too, of the cost of discipleship. Following God is not a transaction, it is a transformation. It asks for your whole self, not just your convenient parts. This can feel daunting, but it is also freeing. When you stop negotiating the terms of surrender, you discover that God's will is not a burden but a gift. What he asks you to release was never meant to sustain you anyway. You may notice that your sense of calling becomes clearer, though not necessarily narrower. It is less about a specific role and more about a way of being. Integrity, compassion, faithfulness, these qualities become central. Wherever you are placed, whatever you are asked to do, these values guide your actions. Calling in this sense is not confined to a single task. It is lived out in every context. At times, you may feel the tension between patience and expectancy. Waiting does not mean abandoning hope. It means holding hope without demanding immediate fulfillment. This tension keeps faith alive, preventing it from collapsing into either passivity or presumption. God honors this posture. It reflects a heart that trusts Him enough to wait and believes Him enough to expect. There is also a quiet joy that begins to surface, not dependent on circumstances, but rooted in assurance. This joy is not loud or fragile. It coexists with sorrow and uncertainty, yet remains steady beneath them. It is the joy of knowing that your life is held within a larger purpose, that nothing is wasted, that even pain can be redeemed. This joy is one of the clearest signs that God is at work. You may still ask questions, still wrestle with doubts, still long for clarity. Faith does not eliminate these struggles, it reframes them. Instead of signs of failure, they become invitations to deeper engagement. God is not threatened by your questions, He welcomes them, knowing that honest inquiry can lead to stronger conviction. As the days unfold, you begin to recognize that the shift you anticipated is not only something ahead of you, but something already happening within you. Your responses change, your perspective widens, your trust deepens. These internal movements may not attract attention, but they are foundational. They ensure that when external change arrives, you are ready to receive it without losing yourself. God's movement is often most evident in hindsight, but it is no less real in the present. Even now, unseen forces are aligning. Even now, prayers you prayed long ago are echoing in ways you could not have predicted. Even now, grace is working quietly, persistently, faithfully. The story is still unfolding, and you are still becoming. And so you continue, not with perfect understanding, but with growing confidence. You walk forward with humility, aware of your limitations, yet anchored in God's sufficiency. You release the need to control every outcome and embrace the call to trust. The shift is not a distant event reserved for some future moment. It is an ongoing process, shaping your heart, refining your faith, and drawing you ever closer to the God who is moving even now, even here, steadily and surely, as the path ahead continues to open, step by step, into a future still rich with purpose, still unfolding, still inviting you to walk on, to listen, to believe, and to remain attentive as the next movements of grace begin to take shape just beyond what you can yet fully see. So stand firm and lift your eyes, even if they are weary, because the God who called you has not paused, forgotten, or reconsidered. What feels uncertain to you is already held with certainty in His hands. The shift you have sensed was never an illusion, it was an invitation to trust more deeply, to release more fully, and to walk more faithfully than before. You are not late, you are not overlooked, and you are not alone. Every step, even the hesitant ones, has been counted. Every tear has been seen, every prayer has been heard. And as you move forward, not with fear but with faith, you will discover that God was not only preparing the way ahead of you, He was preparing you for it.